This virus infects hundreds of thousands of people every year. Yet most people outside a few regions have never even heard of it. Today, you're going to understand what Lassa fever really is and why it quietly remains a serious threat. What is Lassa fever? Lassa fever is a viral disease that many people outside West Africa have never heard of, and that's exactly what makes it so dangerous. Have you ever noticed how some diseases only get attention when they suddenly appear in global headlines? Lassa fever doesn't usually come with dramatic news alerts, even though it has been affecting communities for decades. It's a reminder that some of the most serious health threats can exist quietly outside the spotlight. The disease is caused by the Lassa virus, which was first identified in the late 1960s. Since then, it has remained endemic in several countries in West Africa, meaning it circulates there year after year. For people living in these regions, Lassa fever isn't a rare headline. It's a real, ongoing risk. Can you imagine what it's like to live in a place where a dangerous virus is part of everyday life, even if it's rarely discussed globally? One of the reasons Lassa fever is so difficult to control is that many infections are mild or even asymptomatic. This means people can be infected without realizing it, continuing their daily routines and potentially exposing others. When a disease doesn't always look dangerous at first, it's easy to underestimate it. Have you ever ignored symptoms because they seem not that serious? That's exactly how viruses like Lassa fever can spread quietly. In more severe cases, Lassa fever can cause serious illness, including bleeding, breathing difficulties, and organ damage. These severe outcomes are more likely when medical care is delayed or hard to access. This highlights a harsh reality. The impact of a virus isn't just about how deadly it is. It's also about where it strikes and what resources are available to respond. The same disease can have very different outcomes depending on access to health care. So when we talk about what Lassa fever is, we're not just defining a virus. We're looking at a global imbalance in attention and resources. Why do some diseases remain invisible to most of the world, even when they affect so many people year after year? Understanding what Lassa fever really is helps us see beyond headlines and recognize the quieter threats that deserve awareness and action. How does Lassa fever spread? One of the most surprising things about Lassa fever is that it doesn't spread mainly through dramatic or obvious events. Instead, it often spreads through everyday contact in places where people live close to rodents. The primary source of infection is contact with food or household surfaces contaminated by the urine or droppings of infected rats. Have you ever thought about how easily something you touch or eat could become a hidden source of infection? In many affected regions, these rodents live inside or very close to homes, which makes exposure more likely than people realize. Food stored in open containers, kitchens without proper sealing, and crowded living conditions can all increase the risk. When exposure becomes part of daily life, it's easy to forget that a virus can be present in the background of normal routines. How often do we think about invisible risks in our everyday environment? Lassa fever can also spread from person to person through direct contact with blood or bodily fluids, especially in healthcare settings. Caregivers and medical workers are at higher risk when protective equipment is limited or not used correctly. This shows how important basic infection control measures are. Simple actions like gloves, proper sanitation, and isolation can make a huge difference in stopping the spread. Unlike airborne diseases, Lassa fever does not spread through casual contact, like sharing the same air or passing someone on the street. This is an important distinction because it helps reduce unnecessary fear. The virus requires close and specific types of contact to be transmitted. Understanding this helps people focus on real prevention strategies instead of worrying about everyday interactions that carry little to no risk. Finally, the way Lassa fever spreads highlights how closely human health is connected to living conditions and the environment. When housing, food storage, and sanitation are improved, the risk of exposure drops significantly. This raises a bigger question. How many diseases could be reduced or prevented simply by improving everyday living conditions? Prevention isn't only about medicine. It's also about the environments we create and live in. Why is Lassa fever so dangerous? Lassa fever is dangerous not only because it can be deadly, but because it often hides in plain sight. In many cases, the early symptoms look like common illnesses: fever, headache, weakness, the kind of things most people brush off as just a flu or a mild infection. Have you ever ignored symptoms because they didn't seem serious at first? That's exactly how Lassa fever can quietly progress before anyone realizes what's really happening. Another reason Lassa fever is so dangerous is how uneven its impact can be. While many infections are mild, a smaller percentage become severe, leading to complications like bleeding, respiratory distress, and organ damage. This unpredictability makes the disease harder to manage. You can't always tell early on who will recover quickly and who will develop life-threatening complications. And that uncertainty is part of the danger. Lassa fever is particularly dangerous for pregnant women, especially in the later stages of pregnancy. Severe illness in pregnancy is associated with very high risks for both the mother and the unborn child. This adds another layer of tragedy to outbreaks, as families and communities can be affected in deeply personal ways. It's a reminder that some diseases don't just impact individuals, they ripple through entire families. The danger is also amplified by delays in diagnosis and treatment. In regions where Lassa fever is common, healthcare systems may already be under pressure, and early symptoms can be mistaken for other diseases like malaria or typhoid. When treatment starts late, the chances of severe outcomes increase. This raises an uncomfortable question. How many lives could be saved with faster diagnosis and better access to care? Finally, Lassa fever is dangerous because it rarely captures global attention in the way sudden outbreaks of other viruses do. Its quiet presence means it doesn't trigger the same level of urgency, funding, or awareness. But diseases that operate in the background can be just as destructive over time. Recognizing why Lassa fever is so dangerous helps shift the focus from reacting to headlines to supporting long-term prevention, research, and healthcare where it's needed most. Real risk for you perspective. When you hear about a virus like Lassa fever, it's natural to wonder, could this affect me? For most people watching this video, especially those living outside West Africa, the direct risk of ever encountering Lassa fever is very low. It's not a virus that circulates widely around the world. And everyday life in most countries does not include the kinds of exposures that lead to infection. Have you ever noticed how our fears don't always match our actual level of risk? That said, low risk doesn't mean no risk at all. In a connected world, people travel for work, tourism, and humanitarian missions. Occasionally, isolated cases of Lassa fever are identified outside endemic regions when someone becomes ill after traveling. These cases are rare, but they remind us that diseases don't recognize borders, and that global surveillance plays a key role in early detection and response. For people who live in or travel to affected regions, the real risk is linked to specific exposures. Contact with rodents, contaminated food, and close contact with infected individuals, especially in healthcare or caregiving settings. Simple preventive measures, safe food storage, improved sanitation, and protective equipment in medical settings can significantly reduce risk. This raises an important point. Risk is not just about geography, but about conditions and behaviors. It's also important to recognize that fear can distort how we perceive threats. People sometimes worry intensely about rare diseases while overlooking much more common health risks. Understanding where Lassa fever actually poses a danger helps us focus on realistic precautions instead of unnecessary anxiety. Knowledge doesn't eliminate risk, but it helps us respond rationally rather than react emotionally. So the real risk for you isn't living in constant fear of Lassa fever. The real risk is being uninformed about how diseases spread and how outbreaks are prevented. When people understand their actual level of exposure, they're better equipped to support public health efforts, avoid stigma, and make smarter choices. Awareness, not panic, is what truly protects individuals and communities. Lassa fever shows us that not all dangerous viruses make global headlines. Some spread quietly, year after year, in communities that often lack resources and attention. If you want to learn about real-world viruses most people ignore and why they still matter, subscribe to the channel. In the next video, we'll break down another rare virus scientists are watching closely.